I know I'm late, but you all heard EJ. I mean, not EJ. That's not EJ. Damn, I keep mixing her up with Magic Son. That's Symone Sanders. But you know, a couple weeks ago, she was on Twitter and she went her tirade about black men because you know Uncle Luke, I guess that guy from Florida, who has the keys to the city and been doing prominent things in the city, and he penned an op-ed or a little article, you know, critiquing Kamala Harris's record. Now, for whatever reason, Symone Sanders, no relation to Bernie, decided to say, you know, black men, shut up. We don't want to hear your opinion on politics. You're not political commentators, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to, for the rest of this video, at some point, you know, not critique her. I'm not, you know, as a black man, I can't because Symone Sanders told me not to. But I was confused at why Symone would even jump out the window like that because if I'm not mistaken, she was a Bernie Sanders supporter, and I thought she was doing the whole anti-establishment thing. You know, she was, you know, the counter to the Angela Rye, being who was supporting Cricket Hillary on the establishment side. So I'm confused at, you know, why she would jump out for somebody like Kamala Harris, who's clearly has that corporatist, you know, centrist ideology. She's not like, you know, like a Bernie or Elizabeth Warren allegedly, who's they're all establishment to me. But I thought that she'd be a little bit different. I'm surprised she's defending Kamala Harris. But anyways, EJ does not want black men. I mean, not EJ. Fucking Symone Sanders doesn't want black men speaking on politics. You know, we've been told to be quiet, and we've been blamed for by Mandela Stills that you know it's our fault that Trump won. Then we're Roland Martin told us that we were dumb, and it's just crazy what's going on right here. But anyways, I'm not gonna talk for the rest of the video because I'm a black man and I can't critique Kamala Harris, but apparently everybody else can. You know, I guess the white liberal progressives, Bernie Bros type folks, they can talk about her and no problems. The Young Turks and all them, they can go in on Kamala Harris. But apparently, black men, our opinion is off limits. We don't have the right to speak on Kamala Harris, which again, I don't understand why she's caping for her, being that she was a Bernie supporter, Bernie Sanders supporter, no relation. And Bernie is about to run again, so I'm like, is she back on his team, or is she gonna sell out and go over to the centrist, corporatist type of Democrats or whatnot? I don't know, but I'm gonna stop talking because she doesn't want me to talk as a black man to critique Kamala Harris, and I'm gonna let you know not black men critique or give their opinion because you know they can use their voices on behalf of black men since we just can't talk about politics because you know we just can't.
Themselves apart. The former district attorney and attorney general from California is looking to bill herself as a progressive prosecutor. But experts say that isn't entirely accurate.
She wasn't particularly hardcore, but she wasn't particularly progressive.
Former political science professor Terry Givens says Harris will need to push her progressive credentials to win the Democratic base. And in many cases, she's got them. Harris refused to defend Proposition 8 banning same-sex marriage, went after big banks, and even created Back on Track, a program working to curb young people from spending time in jail and prevent future convictions. Still, those like law professor Lara Bazelon say Harris needs to have a reckoning with herself and her record.
She should stop calling herself a progressive prosecutor because she was not.
Bazelon says Harris has a long list of inconsistent decisions to explain. As California's attorney general, she appealed a decision deeming the death penalty unconstitutional. Yet Harris ran for San Francisco district attorney 15 years ago on an anti-death penalty platform. When a 21-year-old shot and killed a police officer, she refused to seek the death penalty.
Why is it okay for Proposition 8, but it's not okay for the death penalty?
While Attorney General, her office mandated the use of body cameras for its officers. Harris opposed a statewide mandate for all departments.
We had Proposition 47, which reduced certain felonies to misdemeanors. She opposed that. Like many states, we've had really tragic officer-involved shootings, and our state legislature has tried to institute laws, for example, mandating that police wear body-worn cameras and also that the Attorney General's office investigate these officer-involved shootings. So it's not the local DA investigating the local police. And she opposed all three of those pieces of legislation.
Bazelon says Harris's worst offense is her history with wrongful convictions, most notably with George Gage, a man convicted of sexually abusing his stepdaughter. After the conviction, the judge found, quote, potentially exculpatory evidence, but Harris defended the conviction during appeal.
As the top prosecutor, you have the discretion to seek justice. In fact, that's your mission. That's your legal mission. And in my view, seeking justice in this case and in other cases would mean saying this conviction was obtained by unlawful, unconstitutional conduct. I have real concerns about whether this person is innocent or guilty.
While Harris plans to pursue a progressive agenda, Givens says her moderate record could actually be a positive in some states and portions of the country. And for that reason, she doesn't think Harris will shy away from her past.
I think she knows that once she gets to the general election, that's going to play well for her.
We reached out to Senator Harris's presidential campaign for comment and did not hear back.
I do think that though the Democratic candidates may not tear each other apart, she's going to have to account to the voters themselves. And quite honestly, Senator Harris has a black man problem. A few weeks ago, Luther Campbell, famous from the 2 Live crew, I wasn't born when they came out. Maybe you guys were. Anyway, no. I remember them well. Oh, man. I remember them well. I'm just kidding. I remember them well. But 2 Live, Luther Campbell, I mean, at one point, he was like this big, huge superstar, and he's a very active person in Florida. He just got the keys to the city from the mayor down there, so he's a voice that she needs to pay attention to in the battleground state of Florida. And he penned an op-ed criticizing her for her criminal justice record. And listen, it's okay for her to evolve. It's okay for her to develop a new outlook on things, but she has to tell that story. And it can't just be, don't think about what I did last year, just focus on what I'm doing now. And I quite honestly have not heard her tell that story. Jason talked about her truant policy. That impacts disproportionately low-income parents of color. She only recently came out in favor of recreational marijuana use. I mean, that is another thing that impacts people of color. She did not support body cam usage for law enforcement officers. She was not in favor of a bill that was forcing her office to prosecute shootings involving law enforcement officers. So these are things that certainly people at large are going to have questions about, but specifically black men, blue-collar black men, they're going to have a problem with her record. And you're right, Karine, she's not the only person, but I will say I think the African-American community expects more from people who looks like us, particularly a candidate who wants to represent us. It's the old, civil rights saying you have to love the people to lead the people. And if her record does not look that she has consistently loved the people, then they will not question or they will not trust her ability to lead the people. So she needs to find a strong black man advocate who can be in her corner at some point on the campaign, at some point in any space in her campaign. That I would say that was my key advice. Find a prominent blue-collar, self-made black man to be in your corner and be a validator for her. And she doesn't have that right now.
I want to give you a few reasons that I decided that she would be included in my Sleeper Cell series. And again, Sleeper Cells is starting very, very light, okay? But it is going to get very, very intense as we start to name drop and add more people to the series. But some of the things that she did were things like refusing to hand over the names of police officers who had lied and had testimonies that led to convictions of people, despite the officers even being arrested, even though they had been arrested for misconduct and had lied on the stand against people. She did not want to release their names to the general public. She also opposed instituting police body cams statewide. She stood against a bill requiring her office to investigate fatal police shootings. Why would a black woman not want fatal police shootings investigated? She tried to dismiss a lawsuit by California inmates over solitary confinement being abused. These were primarily black men that were saying that black men were disproportionately affected by solitary confinement, that they were given solitary confinement at a rate that was 3 times higher and 3 times longer than their white counterparts. Why would a black woman not want to overturn that? But she lost her appeal to dismiss, and it actually ended up making it so that those inmates filed a class action lawsuit and got a large settlement for that. So she was pretty embarrassed about that. She also, when an attorney inserted a falsified confession into the transcript of a defendant committing what the appeals court called an outrageous form of misconduct, she appealed it, saying, no, there was no physical brutality when he falsified the transcripts. So it was now outrageous. And in case you're not understanding what I'm saying, an attorney lied on a person and put false transcripts in their confession. After that, it was found out, and Kamala Harris did not want to overturn that decision and go back and retry the case, even though she knew that the confession was false. She didn't care. She also argued against regulating bails for poor people. Now, when we talk about bail regulation, we know that bails are predatory and they hurt Black people specifically. She did not want to regulate that, okay? She also was leading this movement to make it so the police could have your DNA samples. Once you got arrested for any crime, they could take your DNA and try to match it up against other people. They called it familial DNA searches. So they basically wanted to find out who all your family was based on your DNA and use that to solve crimes. The problem is that this had always disproportionately affected who? Black people. So now, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get into this series about Miss Kamala Harris because, there's a lot to talk about and a lot to consider. And I'll leave you with this. She also got her start by having an affair with a married man. That will be Willie Brown. Go ahead and look it up if you don't believe me. That's just a little tea, a little extra gossip. But Kamala Harris is definitely a sleeper cell and not the friend of Black people.
I ask you a question. I want to ask you a very direct question. Would you have voted for Obama if he had a white wife? Now, don't you lie to me. You better tell the truth. Because I was talking to you and I was talking to myself. And I know I wouldn't have. I know I wouldn't have. Now, you tell the truth. Would you have? Now, here's the problem. If we voted for a Black family with Obama, then why does Kamala Harris, why does she get to hide? Every time we see her, she's by herself. She gets to hide and not be a Black family when that's the one thing we voted for Obama for. I'm just trying to figure it out. How does she not to get to be held by that standard? How does she not have to have that kind of validation? Well, then you're going to tell me, well, Yvette, well, it's not just about that. I don't even know. I don't even know if these people, when I look at them and when I compare them, when I look at them everywhere else I see pictures, it's kind of odd because, even at y'all's wedding, y'all look more like business partners than like the thing that we voted for in the Obamas. That's what y'all look like. I'm not trying to be mean. It don't look like this. But that's what we voted for. That right there. That's what we voted for. And that's not what I see in terms of what I look at right now. So here is where I am. Before you all say, and before you say something about, well, we've gotten beyond just voting for people. It's that's not just you just trying to be against interracial marriage, Yvette. You're just trying. No, I'm not. It's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. It's so much bigger than that. Because Kamala Harris is trying to claim MLK Day or MLK and claim American DOS when, hold on, you have no connection. You have no connection to the bottom caste in this country, which come from slaves, right? Those are our descendants, slaves and slave masters. That's who we come. You have no connection to any of that. You have connection to a Jamaican father, and an Indian mother. And it's worse than that. This thing right here, Kamala Harris says, and this is in the Times of India, Kamala Harris says inspired by her superhero Indian American mother. Now understand, if you go out through the web, ladies and gentlemen, because I spent a lot of time researching today, if you go throughout the web, you can't even find nothing. You can't even find nothing about her Jamaican daddy. Just like Obama's Kenyan father just got dismissed. What is the purpose of all these black men y'all want to pull in, even though they're not American DOS, who are invisible and get erased anyway? These are invisible people. They get erased. And understand, when we talk about voting for Obama, everybody was voting for black love and the potential of black love. It wasn't just about them being a candidate. It was about the potential for black family and black love and all of that. That's not this. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. These two things are not the same. So we look at that. Now understand that that's just part of it. Understand that when we look at this is not the whole thing. This is just part of the picture. This is all part of the picture, ladies and gentlemen. There are lots of parts of this picture, though, and we're going to get to all of them. We're going to get to every little aspect of it. Because we have to. Why not? Why not? Now, you have to understand something else. You have to understand, as I slow this down a little bit, you have to understand the lens through which these people understand themselves, understand life, understand America. Now, you see in this quote, when I say Obama understood life through the lens of his white mother. That's how he talked. That's how he understood. And we came to understand that later. Michelle was his validation, and that's what gave us a cue. But we came to understand that later. But here is what Kamala Harris says in her book. It was really my mother who took charge of our upbringing. She was the most responsible for shaping us into the women we would become. She's talking about her and her sister. And she was extraordinary, Harris writes in her books, The Truth We Hold, An American Journey. This is a person who sees life through the lens of her mother. Now understand also, she has two professional parents. Kamala Harris was born on October 20, 1964 in Oakland, California, to a Tamil Indian mother and a Jamaican father. Her mother, Shyamala Gopalan Harris, was a breast cancer scientist who immigrated to the U.S. from Madras in 1960. Her father, Donald Harris, is a Stanford University economics professor who immigrated, and this is from Wikipedia, from Jamaica in 1961. Now, before I go on, I want to say one thing. Understand, and my immigrant allies and non-allies can call in. I want to ask you a question too. When you go home or when you're here, do your people call themselves African American or Jamaican? Do they just not make a distinction between the two? What does everybody call themselves? I want to know. Now let's go. I want to go to another clip so we can further understand who these people are, who we can understand who the parents are. We're talking about Kamala Harris. Her name, Kamala, comes from the Sanskrit word for the lotus flower. Her family lived in Berkeley, California, where both her parents attended graduate school. She was extremely close to her maternal grandfather, P.V. Gopalan, an Indian diplomat. As a child, she frequently visited her extended family in Besant Nagar neighborhood of Tamil. Okay. Harris grew up going to both Black Baptist Church and the Hindu temple. She has a younger sister, Maya. They were both in the choir. Now, before you tell me, now look, I want you to know this person had two professional parents. Two professionals. I'm not talking about just even professional like white collar. I'm talking about Stanford professor, a mother who's trying to find a cure to cancer. Now, before you tell me, well, Yvette, we have that too. We got the same thing. This is your life. That is not your life. See,
her candidacy will go down in flames. Kamala Harris, DA, saw felony conviction rates soar from 52% to 67%, and drug convictions went up to 74%. Until last year, she scoffed at legalizing marijuana, so she was basically Jeff Sessions in a dress. Of course, she inked her false narrative in a new book, The Truths We Hold, which should be called The Hypocrisy We Practice. She writes, quote, "The job of progressive prosecutor is to look out for the overlooked." Unless, of course, one of the overlooked happens to be someone on death row, as she appealed a federal judge's ruling the death penalty was unconstitutional. She didn't want to send those convicts to the gas chamber. She felt she owed it to them. Harris continues, her job is to speak up for those voices who aren't being heard and to shine a light on the inequality and unfairness that lead to injustice. As Loyola Law School professor Laura Bazelon writes in the New York Times, Kamala Harris kept one man in prison on a 70-year sentence. He's still serving that despite exculpatory evidence and a legal technicality when George Gage was representing himself. Or Daniel Larson, who had an incompetent attorney. He was sentenced to 28 years to life for gun possession. Or the 600 defendants who had to have their cases thrown out when a dirty police technician, whom Harris and her team knew about, was tainting evidence and stealing drugs. Harris not only didn't disclose the corruption to defense attorneys, she appealed the tossed cases. Kamala Harris's troubled road leads right to injustice. The question is whether or not her fellow Democrats will be brave and honest enough to uncover her problematic past, or if identity politics and political correctness will prevent them from revealing the truth. And that's the memo.
I'm going to talk about the bad. I'm going to talk about the good too, because I've seen a lot of bad stuff, but I want to weigh it all out, okay? I don't want to be that type of person. Okay, so, and I'm going to look down and read because y'all, I'm not really into politics like that. So I'm just going to read the scenarios and just give my opinion wrapped up at the end. So this is the negative things that I read about her. So in 2014, she refused to take a position on Proposition 47. And basically Proposition 47 is a voter approved measure to reduce low-level felonies to misdemeanors, okay? She was against that. Also in 2014, they said she laughed at reporters when they asked her would she support the legalization of marijuana. And you know, that's very, very big right now in these days. Like, people just want marijuana to be legal and stuff like that because ain't nobody heard of a little weed killing nobody. She was opposed again in 2014. She was opposed again of the release of non-violent inmates on the grounds that prisons would lose an important labor pool. So she said prisons would lose an important labor pool if they were to release non-violent inmates. She also, now when I say like, I looked at several different articles and a lot of them have like her stories up there, so you gotta do your own research. Please do your own research on these people because we do not need another Trump in the White House. She was also opposed to a bill in 2015, and this bill was to require her office to investigate shootings involving officers. She also refused to support statewide standards regulating the use of body-worn cameras by police officers. Now that's a big thing for me because I believe that police officers should wear body cameras and they need to be investigated for some of these things that they are doing out here in these communities. Now, she also had a lot of things to say towards sex workers. She was against campaigns that decriminalize consensual adult prostitution in California. She ignored the lobbying of sex workers. Now, there are several other people that she personally hurt, like that had like 20+ year sentences that were proven to be innocent, but she refused, y'all, she refused to let them go. Even when people said that their lawyers were incompetent, like they had the proof that they were telling the truth, like that they were not guilty, she still kept them with their remaining sentences. Like, she did some real, like, as far as criminal justice, like her background is very shaky and very shady. They said Harris had a power to stand on the side of justice for the accused, and she repeatedly declined to take a stance. Instead, she relied on things like legal technicalities in an attempt to uphold convictions that most people would be considered had handed out wrongfully. So that's a whole question mark right there. So I don't like that. So then I started to read about the good things.
A piece that was widely circulated, an op-ed piece in the New York Times, taking on Kamala Harris and saying she was not a progressive prosecutor. I'll read a little bit of you to yourself. Time after time, when progressives urged her to embrace criminal justice reforms as a district attorney and then the state's attorney general, Ms. Harris opposed them or stayed silent. Most troubling, Ms. Harris fought tooth and nail to uphold wrongful convictions that had been secured through the official misconduct that included evidence tampering, false testimony, and the suppression of crucial information by prosecutors. There's been some pushback on that, including from some folks from California, from the Oakland area, who are supportive of Kamala Harris and say that this is an unfair characterization of her. Why did you write the op-ed? And are you essentially saying that Kamala Harris is disqualified from calling herself a progressive?
I'm not at all saying she's disqualified. What I'm saying is we need to compare how she's describing herself, which is a progressive prosecutor, to her record, which is not progressive. And my op-ed was full of examples that point to that. So, and there are more. But I think when we have somebody seizing that mantle of a term that has a very specific meaning to people who work in that space, they need to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. And so my point in writing this was to point out the difference between the way that she's describing herself now and the decisions that she made as first San Francisco district attorney and then as the state's attorney general.
Just to set the stage, is there a candidate that you are supporting? About her blackness because of her my Caribbean sister.
I think that it's important for us to be having a policy conversation about the work that she has done rather than talking about her as a woman candidate or as a black candidate or as this first candidate or what have you. But the reality is that I do think that it's problematic for her to call herself a progressive prosecutor. One, I don't think that those exist, really. I think they're kind of like unicorns. And so the reality is that she needs to stand on what she did and say that as president, she's going to make these changes beyond the First Step Act that was passed by bipartisan bill that was passed just a few months ago, that she's going to move beyond that and really talk about the incarceration rate, really talk about how black and brown people and poverty is criminalized, and really be able to stand on her record.
Let's widen this out a little bit. And I'll go to you on this, Laura.
Because could I jump in for a second here,
sure.
Joy, and just push back a little bit on that? I do believe that there is such a thing as a progressive prosecutor. It is a term that has a very specific meaning. And what it means is that when you have that top job, you don't see your role as being another brick in mass incarceration. And we have so many examples of people who have run and won on these insurgent platforms of reform, where they don't prosecute low-level felonies, where they don't prosecute people for marijuana, where when a tainted conviction is brought to their attention, rather than stand by it and stand on technicalities and weaponize them, they go to the court and they say, this is wrong. I believe this person is innocent and I'm going to stand down. We have examples of that now, but we also have examples of that during the time that Harris was a prosecutor. For example, Ken Thompson, who was the prosecutor in Brooklyn from 2013 to 2016 until, unfortunately, he died at the age of 50. He exonerated 20 people, and he ran on a platform of racial and social justice.
Well, I mean, no one is perfect.